Welcome back. I'm Shelley Harris, Director of Philanthropy at Frank Toby Jones, and I am reading the last installment of The Mystery of the Spanish Chest by Agatha Christie. Hope you're enjoying it. And when we last left off, Inspector Hercule Poirot had been interviewing the Spences. They had been at the dinner party, and the Spences are Linda and Jeremy. And it was now finally time to interview Major Rich, who has been accused of the murder. So, you will forgive my saying, Mr. Poirot, that I cannot see how you can be of assistance to me in any way. Poirot did not answer. He was looking thoughtfully at the man who had been charged with the murder of his friend Arnold Clayton. He was looking at the firm jaw, the narrow head, a lean brown man, athletic and sinewy, something of the greyhound about him, a man whose face gave nothing away, and who was receiving his visitor with a marked lack of cordiality. I quite understand that Mrs. Clayton sent you to see me with the best intentions, but quite frankly, I think she was unwise both for her own sake and mine. You mean? Major Rich gave a nervous glance over his shoulder, but the attendant warden was the regulation distance away. Rich lowered his voice. They've got to find a motive for this ridiculous accusation. They'll try to bring that there was an association between Mrs. Clayton and myself. That, as I know Mrs. Clayton will have told you, is quite untrue. We are friends, nothing more. But surely it is advisable that she should make no move on my behalf? Hercule Poirot ignored the point. Instead, he picked out a word. You said this ridiculous accusation, but it is not that, you know. I did not kill Arnold Clayton. Call it then a false accusation. Say the accusation is not true, but it is not ridiculous. On the contrary, it is highly plausible. You must know that very well. I can only tell you that to me it seems fantastic. Well, saying that will be of very little use to you. We must think of something more useful than that. I am represented by lawyers. They have briefed, I understand, eminent counsel to appear for my defense. I cannot accept your use of the word we. Unexpectedly, Poirot smiled. Ah, he said in his most foreign manner, that is the flea in the ear you give me. Very well, I go. I wanted to see you. I have seen you. Already I've looked up your career. You passed high up into Sandhurst. You passed into the Staff College, and so on and on. I've made my own judgment of you today. You are not a stupid man. And what has all that got to do with it? Everything. It is impossible that a man of your ability should commit a murder in the way this one was committed. Very well, you are innocent. Tell me now about your manservant Burgess. Burgess? Yes, if you didn't kill Clayton, Burgess must have done so. The conclusion seems inescapable. But why? There must be a why. You are the only person who knows Burgess well enough to make a guess at it. Why, Major Rich, why? I can't imagine. I simply can't see it. Oh, I've followed the same line of reasoning as you have. Yes, Burgess had opportunity. The only person who had except myself. The trouble is I just can't believe it. Burgess is not the sort of man you can imagine murdering anybody. What do your legal advisors think? Rich's lips set in a grim line. My legal advisors spend their time asking me, in a persuasive way, if it isn't true that I've suffered all my life from blackouts where I don't really know what I'm doing. Ah, as bad as that, said Poirot. Well, perhaps we shall find it is Burgess who is subject to blackouts. It is always an idea. And the weapon now. They showed it to you and asked you if it was yours? It was not mine. I had never seen it before. It was not yours, no. But are you quite sure you had never seen it before? No. Was there a faint hesitation? It's a kind of ornamental toy, really. One sees things like that lying about in people's houses. In a woman's drawing room, perhaps. Perhaps in Mrs. Clayton's drawing room? Certainly not. The last word came out loudly, and the warden looked up. Fine. Certainly that not, and there is no need to shout. But somewhere, at some time, you have seen something very like it, eh? I am right? I do not think so. In some curio shop, perhaps. Ah, very likely. Poirot rose. I take my leave. And now, said Hercule Poirot, for Burgess. Yes, at long last, for Burgess. He'd learned something about the people in the case, from themselves and from each other. But nobody had given him any knowledge of Burgess. No clue, no hint of what kind of man he was. When he saw Burgess, he realized why. The valet was waiting for him at Major Rich's apartment, apprised of his arrival by a telephone call from Commander McLaren. I am Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Yes, sir, I was expecting you. Burgess held back the door with a deferential hand, and Poirot entered. A small square entrance hall, a door on the left open, leading into the sitting room. Burgess relieved Poirot of his hat and coat and followed him into the sitting room. Ah, said Poirot, looking round. It was here, then, that it happened? Yes, sir. A quiet fellow, Burgess, white-faced, a little weedy, awkward shoulders and elbows. A flat voice with a provincial accent that Poirot did not know. From the East Coast, perhaps. Rather a nervous man, perhaps, but otherwise no definite characteristics. It was hard to associate him with positive action of any kind. Could one postulate a negative killer? He had those pale blue, rather shifty eyes that unobservant people often equate with dishonesty. Yet a liar can look you in the face with a bold and confident eye. What is happening to the flat? Poirot inquired. I'm still looking after it, sir. Major Rich arranged for my pay and to keep it nice until... The eyes shifted uncomfortably. Until? Agreed Poirot. He added in a matter-of-fact manner, I should say that Major Rich will almost certainly be committed for trial. The case will come up probably within 3 months. Burgess shook his head, not in denial, simply in perplexity. It really doesn't seem possible, he said. That Major Rich should be a murderer? The whole thing, that chest. His eyes went across the room. Ah, so that is the famous chest. It was a mammoth piece of furniture of very dark polished wood, studded with brass, with a great brass hasp and antique lock. A handsome piece of furniture. Poirot went over to it. It stood against the wall near the window, next to a modern cabinet for holding records. On the other side of it was a door, half ajar. The door was partly masked by a big painted leather screen. That leads into Major Rich's bedroom, said Burgess. Poirot nodded. His eyes traveled to the other side of the room. There were 2 stereophonic record players, each on a low table, trailing cords of snake-like flecks. There were easy chairs and a big table. On the walls were a set of Japanese prints. It was a lovely room, comfortable, but not luxurious. He looked back at William Burgess. The discovery, he said kindly, must have been a great shock to you. Oh, it was, sir. I'll never forget it. The valet rushed into speech. Words poured from him. He felt perhaps that by telling the story often enough, he might at last expunge it from his mind. I'd gone around the room, sir, clearing up, glasses and so on. I'd just stooped to pick up a couple of olives off the floor, and I saw it, on the rug, a dark, rusty stain. No, the rug's gone now, to the cleaners. The police had done with it. Whatever's that, I thought, saying to myself, almost in joke, like, really, it might be blood. But where does it come from? What got spilt? And then I saw it was from the chest, down the side here, where there's a crack. And I stood, still not thinking anything. Well, whatever? And I lifted up the lid like this. He suited the action to the word. And there it was, the body of a man lying on his side, doubled up, like he might be asleep. And that nasty foreign knife or dagger thing sticking up out of his neck. I'll never forget it, never. Not as long as I live. The shock, not expecting it, you understand? He breathed deeply. I let the lid fall and I ran out of the flat and down to the street, looking for a policeman, and lucky I found one just round the corner. Poirot regarded him reflectively. The performance, if it was a performance, was very good. He began to be afraid that it was not a performance, that it was just how things had happened. You do not think of awakening first, Major Rich? He asked. It never occurred to me, sir. What with the shock, I just wanted to get out of here. He swallowed and get help. Poirot nodded. Did you realize that it was Mr. Clayton? He asked. I ought to have, sir, but you know, I don't believe I did. Of course, as soon as I got back with the police officer, I said, why, it's Mr. Clayton. And he says, who's Mr. Clayton? And I says, he was here last night. Ah, said Poirot, last night. Do you remember exactly when it was Mr. Clayton arrived here? Not to the minute, but as near as not 7:45, I'd say. You knew him well? He and Mrs. Clayton had been here quite frequently during the year and a half I've been employed here. Did he seem quite as usual? I think so, a little out of breath, but I took it he'd been hurrying. He was catching a train, or so he said. He had a bag with him, I suppose, as he was going to Scotland? No, sir, I imagine he was keeping a taxi down below. Was he disappointed to find that Major Rich was out? Not to notice, just said he'd scribble a note. He came in here and went over to the desk, and I went back to the kitchen. I was a little behind with the anchovy eggs. The kitchen's at the end of the passage, and you don't hear very well from there. I didn't hear him go out or the master come in, but then I wouldn't expect to. And the next thing? Major Rich called me. He was standing in the door here. He said he'd forgotten Mrs. Spence's Turkish cigarettes. I was to hurry out and get them, so I did. I brought them back and put them on the table in here. Of course, I took it that Mr. Clayton had left by then to get his train. And nobody else came to the flat during the time Major Rich was out, and you were in the kitchen? No, sir, no one. Can you be sure of that? How could anyone, sir? They'd have had to ring the bell. Poirot shook his head. How could anyone? The Spences and McLaren and also Mrs. Clayton could, he already knew. And he knew account for every minute of their time. McLaren had been with acquaintances at the club. The Spences had had a couple of friends in for a drink before starting out. Margarita Clayton had talked to a friend on the telephone at just that period. Not that he thought of any of them as possibilities. There would have been better ways of killing Arnold Clayton than following him to a flat with a manservant there and the host returning any moment. No, he had had a last-minute hope of a mysterious stranger, something out of Clayton's apparently impeccable past, recognizing him in the street, following him here, attacking him with a stiletto, thrusting the body into the chest, and fleeing. Pure melodrama, unrelated to reason or to probabilities. In tune with romantic historical fictions and matching the Spanish chest. He went back across the room to the chest. He raised the lid, and it came up easily, noiselessly. In a faint voice, Burgess said, "It's been scrubbed out, sir. I saw to that." Poirot bent over it. With a faint exclamation, he bent lower. He explored with his fingers. These holes at the back and one side, they feel as though they had been made quite recently. Holes, sir? The valet bent to see. I really couldn't say. I've never noticed them particularly. They're not very obvious, but they are there. What is their purpose, would you say? I really wouldn't know, sir. Some animal, perhaps? I mean, a beetle? Something of that kind? Something that gnaws wood? Some animal, said Poirot. I wonder. He stepped back across the room. When you came in here with the cigarettes, was there anything at all about this room that looked different? Anything at all? Chairs moved, a table, something of that kind? It's odd you're saying that, sir. Now you come to mention it, there was. That screen there that cuts off the draught from the bedroom door, it was moved over a bit more to the left. Like this? Poirot moved swiftly. A little more still. That's right. The screen had already masked about half of the chest. The way it was now arranged, it almost hid the chest altogether. Why did you think it had moved? I didn't think, sir. Ugh, another Miss Lemon. Burgess added doubtfully, I suppose it leaves the way into the bedroom clearer if the ladies wanted to leave their wraps. Perhaps, but there might be another reason. Burgess looked inquiring. The screen hides the chest now, and it hides the rug below the chest. If Major Rich stabbed Mr. Clayton, blood would presently start dripping through the cracks at the base of the chest. Someone might notice, as you noticed the next morning. So the screen was moved. I never thought of that, sir. What are the lights like here? Strong or dim? I'll show you, sir. Quickly the valet drew the curtains and switched on a couple of lamps. They gave a soft, mellow light, hardly strong enough even to read by. Poirot glanced up at a ceiling light. That wasn't on. It's very little used. Poirot looked around in the soft glow, and the valet said, I don't believe you'd see any bloodstains, sir. It's too dim. I think you are right. So then why was the screen moved? Burgess shivered. It's awful to think of a nice gentleman like Major Rich doing a thing like that. You've no doubt that he did do it? Why did he do it, Burgess? Well, he'd been through the war, of course. He might have had a head wound, wouldn't he? They do say as sometimes it all flares up years afterwards. They suddenly go all strange and don't know what they're doing. And they say as often as not, it's their nearest and dearest that they go for. Do you think it could have been like that? Poirot gazed at him. He sighed and turned away. No, it was not like that. With the air of a conjurer, a piece of crisp paper was insinuated into Burgess's hand. Oh, thank you, sir, but I really don't. You have helped me, said Poirot, by showing me this room, by showing me what is in the room, by showing me what took place that evening. The impossible is never impossible. Remember that. I said that there were only two possibilities, and I was wrong. There is a third possibility. He looked around the room again and gave a little shiver. Pull back the curtains. Let in the light and the air. This room really needs it. It needs cleansing. It will be a long time, I think, before it is purified from what afflicts it, the lingering memory of hate. Burgess, his mouth open, handed Poirot his hat and coat. He seemed bewildered. Poirot, who enjoyed making incomprehensible statements, went down to the street with a brisk step. When Poirot got home, he made a telephone call to Inspector Miller. What happened to Clayton's bag? His wife said he had packed one. It was at the club. He left it with the porter. And then he must have forgotten it and gone off without it. What was in it? What you'd expect. Pajamas, an extra shirt, and some washing things. Very thorough. What did you expect would be in it? Poirot ignored that question. He said, about the stiletto. I suggest that you get hold of whatever cleaning woman attends Mrs. Spence's house. Find out if she ever saw anything like it lying about there." "Mrs. Spence?" Miller whistled. "Is that the way your mind is working? The Spences were shown the stiletto. They didn't recognize it." "Ask them again." "Do you mean—" and then let me know what they say." "I can't imagine what you think you have got a hold of." "Read Othello, Miller. Consider the characters in Othello. We've missed out on one of them." He rang off, and next Poirot dialed Lady Chatterton. The number was busy. He tried again a little later, still no success. He called for George, his valet, and instructed him to continue ringing the number until he got a reply. Later, Lady Chatterton, he knew, was an incorrigible telephoner. He sat down in a chair, carefully eased off his patent leather shoes, stretched his legs, and leaned back. "Ugh, I am old," said Hercule Poirot. "I tire easily." He brightened. "But the cells, they still function. Slowly, but the brain cells function. Othello, yes. Who was it said that to me? Ah, yes, Mrs. Spence. The bag, the screen, the body lying there like a man asleep. A clever murder. Premeditated, planned. I think, enjoyed." George announced to him that Lady Chatterton was on the line. "Hercule Poirot here, madam. May I speak to your guest?" "Why, of course. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, have you done something wonderful?" "Not yet," said Poirot, "but possibly in due time." Presently, Margarita's voice, quiet, gentle. "Madam, when I asked you if you noticed anything out of place that evening at the party, you frowned as though you remembered something, and then it escaped you. Would it have been the position of the screen that night?" Margarita answered, "The screen? Why, of course, yes. It was not quite in its usual place." "Did you dance that night?" "Part of the time." "Who did you dance with mostly?" "Oh, Jeremy Spence. He's a wonderful dancer. Charles is good, but not spectacular. He and Linda danced, and now and then we exchanged partners. Jock McLaren doesn't dance. He got out the records and sorted them and arranged what we'd play." "You had serious music later?" "Yes." There was a pause, and then Margarita said, "Monsieur Poirot, what is all this? Is there hope? Do you ever know, madam, what the people around you are feeling?" Her voice, faintly surprised, said, "I suppose so." "I suppose not. I think you have no idea. I think that is the tragedy of your life. But the tragedy is for other people, not for you. Someone today mentioned to me Othello. I asked you if your husband was jealous, and you thought he must be. But you said it quite lightly. You said it as Desdemona might have said it, not realizing danger. She, too, recognized jealousy, but she did not understand it, because she herself never had and never could experience jealousy. She was, I think, quite unaware of the force of acute physical passion. She loved her husband with the romantic fervor of hero worship. She loved her friend Cassio quite innocently as a close companion. I think that because of her immunity to passion, she herself drove men mad. Am I making sense to you, madam?" There was a pause, and then Margarita's voice answered, cool, sweet, a little bewildered. I don't really understand what you are saying." Poirot sighed. He spoke in matter-of-fact tones. "This evening," he said, "I pay you a visit." Inspector Miller was not an easy man to persuade, but equally Hercule Poirot was not an easy man to shake off until he got his way. Inspector Miller grumbled, but he gave in. Though what has Lady Chatterland got to do with... Nothing really. She has provided asylum for a friend, that is all. About those Spences, how did you know? That the stiletto came from there? It was a mere guess. Something Jeremy Spence said gave me the idea. I suggested that the stiletto belonged to Margarita Clayton. He showed that he knew positively that it did not. He paused. What did they say? He asked with some curiosity. Admitted that it was very like a toy dagger they'd once had, but it had been mislaid some weeks ago, and they had really forgotten about it. I suppose Rich pinched it from there. A man who likes to play safe, Mr. Jeremy Spence, said Hercule Poirot. He muttered to himself, some weeks ago. Oh yes, the planning began a long time ago. Hey, what's that? We have arrived, said Poirot. The taxi drew up at Lady Chatterton's house in Sheridan Street. Poirot paid the fare. Margarita Clayton was waiting for them in the room upstairs. Her face hardened when she saw Miller. I didn't know. You did not know who the friend was I proposed to bring? Inspector Miller is not a friend of mine. Well, that rather depends on whether you want to see justice done or not, Mrs. Clayton. Your husband was murdered. And now we have to talk about who killed him, said Poirot quickly. May we sit down, madam? Slowly, Margarita sat down in a high-backed chair facing the two men. I ask, said Poirot, addressing both his hearers, to listen to me patiently. I think I now know what happened on that fatal evening at Major Rich's flat. We started, all of us, by an assumption that was not true. The assumption that there were only two persons who had the opportunity of putting the body in the chest. That is to say, Major Rich or William Burgess. But we were wrong. There was a third person at the flat that evening who had an equally good opportunity to do so. And who was that? Demanded Miller skeptically. The elevator boy? No. Arnold Clayton. What? Concealed his own dead body? You're crazy. Naturally, not a dead body, a live one. In simple terms, he hid himself in the chest. A thing that has often been done throughout the course of history. The dead bride in the mistletoe bough, Ichimo with designs on the virtue of Imogen, and so on. I thought of it as soon as I saw that there had been holes bored in the chest quite recently. Why? They were made so that there might be a sufficiency of air in the chest. Why was the screen moved from its usual position that evening? So as to hide the chest from the people in the room, so that the hidden man could lift the lid from time to time, relieve the cramp in his legs, and hear better what went on. But why? Demanded Margarita, wide-eyed with astonishment. Why should Arnold want to hide in the chest? It is you who asked that, madam? Your husband was a jealous man. He was also an inarticulate man, bottled up, as your friend Mrs. Spence put in. His jealousy mounted. It tortured him. Were you or were you not Rich's mistress? He did not know. He had to know. So, a telegram from Scotland, the telegram that was never sent and that no one ever saw. The overnight bag is packed and conveniently forgotten at the club. He goes to the flat at a time when he has probably ascertained Rich will be out. He tells the valet he will write a note. As soon as he is left alone, he bores the holes in the chest, moves the screen, and climbs inside the chest. Tonight, he will know the truth. Perhaps his wife will stray behind the others. Perhaps she will go, but come back again. That night, the desperate, jealousy-racked man will know. You're not saying he stabbed himself? Inspector Miller's voice was incredulous. Nonsense. Oh no, someone else stabbed him. Somebody who knew he was there. It was murder, all right. Carefully planned, long premeditated murder. Think of the other characters in Othello. It is Iago we should have remembered. Subtle poisoning of Arnold Clayton's mind hints suspicions. Honest Iago, the faithful friend, the man you always believe. Arnold Clayton believed him. Arnold Clayton let his jealousy be played upon. He roused to fever pitch. Was the plan of hiding in the chest Arnold's own idea? He may have thought it was. Probably he did think so. And so the scene is set. The stiletto, quietly abstracted some weeks earlier, is ready. The evening comes. The lights are low. The gramophone is playing. Two couples dance. And the odd man out is busy at the record cabinet, close to the Spanish chest and its masking screen. To slip behind the screen, lift the lid, and strike, audacious but quite easy. Clayton would have cried out. Not if he were drugged, said Poirot. According to the valet, the body was lying like a man asleep. Clayton was asleep, drugged by the only man who could have drugged him, the man he had had a drink with at the club. Jock? Margarita's voice rose high in childlike surprise. Jock? Not dear old Jock. Why, I've known Jock all my life. Why on earth should Jock... Poirot turned on her. Why did two Italians fight a duel? Why did a young man shoot himself? Jock McLaren is an inarticulate man. He has resigned himself, perhaps, to being the faithful friend to you and your husband. But then comes Major Rich as well. It is too much. In the darkness of hate and desire, he plans what is well nigh the perfect murder. A double murder, for Rich is almost certain to be found guilty of it. And with Rich and your husband both out of the way, he thinks that at last you may turn to him. And perhaps, madam, you would have done so, eh? Almost unconsciously she breathed. Perhaps, I don't know. Inspector Miller spoke with sudden authority. This is all very well, Poirot. It's a theory, nothing more. There's not a shred of evidence. Probably not a word of it is true. It is all true. But there's no evidence. There's nothing we can act on. You are wrong. I think that McLaren, if this is put to him, will admit it. That is, if it is made clear to him that Margarita Clayton knows. Poirot paused and added, because once he knows that he is lost, the perfect murder has been in vain. So, that is the end of the Mystery of the Spanish Chest. I hope you enjoyed it. Please stay warm, healthy, and safe. And next week, we'll read another story by Agatha Christie. Thank you, and have a great day.